There is no intro for this one. I have to go to the Indianapolis Regional Championships tomorrow, and I'm getting all my videos done ahead of time. Let's talk about sleeper picks in Regulation MA. Okay, sleeper picks in Regulation MA. I have a few I want to talk about. One of these is the most controversial of all, but I'm going to go in order of controversial take to least, most controversial take to least controversial take. So, first Pokemon I want to talk about is Kommo-o. Now, Kommo-o is a pretty interesting Pokemon in Regulation MA. This thing did win the Singapore Master Ball League a few weeks ago, and it was on a team with a Mega Venusaur, with Mega Venusaur basically playing bodyguard for Kommo-o against the likes of Sylveon and Mega Floette Eternal. But Kommo-o is a very interesting Pokemon. For the most part, a Kommo-o will just run like a max spread with Modest Nature and the ability Soundproof with the move Clangorous Soul. So what Clangorous Soul does, also it runs leftovers, and it tends to have like some kind of recovery Pokemon next to it, like a Sinistcha or maybe some form of redirection or fake out. But Clangorous Soul allows for Kommo-o to sacrifice a third of its health to get +1 in all of its stats. +1 Kommo-o, if it's running a Modest Nature, sometimes it runs Timid as well. It has 137 speed, right? 137 speed times 1.5 hits a 205 speed tier, which is enough for basically base Aerodactyl, but not Mega Aerodactyl. However, if you do opt for Timid, you hit 150 speed, which 150 times 1.5, of course, is after the Clangorous Soul, hits 225, allowing for you to outspeed even Mega Aerodactyl. So it is kind of a judgment call in your case. But effectively, what Kommo-o does is it fills the role of the Pokemon that is like your spread initial attacker to soften up the rest of the team. Kommo-o is a Pokemon with some pretty impressive damage after the initial boost, usually with like a Modest Nature. That's where you get the most value out of it. If we want to take a look at Charizard, I think that's a good example of a Pokemon that it can deal pretty massive damage to at +1. But basically at +1, a Modest Clanging Scales is a 2-hit KO against Mega Charizard Y, which isn't able to hit you back very hard at all, because you will be at +1, or if they want to go for like a Heat Wave before you get the setup off, it isn't doing enough where it's knocking you in range where you can't get your setup move. But yeah, if you do get to +1 special defense from setting up, they're only going to be able to do 29% or 41%, with them basically never running Air Slash in this format. They usually run like Solar Beam or Helping Hand or something. It's basically just mono fire coming out from that Pokemon, meaning that your Kommo-o is able to switch in on it and set up pretty effectively. Those Clanging Scales are able to hit not only Charizard for 50%, but also it's going to be able to deal with the likes of Garchomp, which is one of the strongest Pokemon in the format right now, just outright one-shotting it. Of course, you're not always going to be able to get that setup off, or you might have to run like a Timid Nature. At that point, your damage output is significantly weaker with the Timid Nature because you don't have that extra 10% boost, but it still is two-shotting Charizard Y. And of course, into that Garchomp, something that you might be interested in is the initial damage. Kommo-o, it doesn't always have to get the setup off. I think the setup is not a bad idea in most situations. Typically, you do like that initial turn to make sure that the next few turns you're able to use Kommo-o at full power. But even the initial damage isn't that bad. It's doing 87% to like a not very bulky Garchomp and into like a Charizard Y. You're still doing pretty respectable damage with it being a 3-hit KO into it. But there's also other Pokemon in the format you of course want to deal with, most notably Sneasler. Has like it's a Pokemon that you're going to be dealing with in a lot of matchups. Your Clanging Scales is going to be doing 44 to 53% without a boost, and into a Aerodactyl, which is a Pokemon with some pretty impressive special bulk, all things considered, at least on the Mega variant. If you do manage to get to +1 and you're running that Timid Nature, which typically you want to go Modest, but if you do want to outrun this Pokemon, you need Timid. Clanging Scales is a 2-shot. However, Aura Sphere is also going to be a 2-shot, but you want to go for Clanging Scales because it's a spread move. Basically, Kommo-o is one of the few good spread special attackers, and while its main spread move is a Dragon type move, which isn't able to deal a lot of super effective damage, as it really only hits dragons for super effective, its neutral matchups allow for it to be pretty consistent across the board, kind of similar like matchup spread to like fairy types, you know. So yeah, that is pretty good for Kommo-o. Of course, it is a very setup reliant Pokemon, and Kommo-o tends to find itself mostly on Perish Trap teams, as Soundproof allows for it to be immune to partner Gengar Perish Song. But even beyond that, Kommo-o likes to run Soundproof because Sylveon is running around everywhere. Sylveon is one of the best Pokemon in the format. And Sylveon's typical moveset involves Hyper Voice, Quick Attack, and Hyper Beam, meaning that Hyper Beam is actually quite the commitment to one-shot the Kommo-o. Hyper Voice basically is not really an issue for you, as you do have Soundproof, meaning you're just completely immune to that. And while Quick Attack is pretty significant damage into a kommo-o, right? A Sylveon Fairy Feather Quick Attack is ×4 effective and has the Fairy Feather boost, so Quick Attack's gonna be doing like half to kommo-o with no investment whatsoever, mind you, and an even negative attack nature. That is something to look out for, but if you surround it with the right Pokemon, kommo-o tends to do well. Like, kommo-o Gengar is a good duo, not only just for the Perish Song option, but also just because Gengar plays bodyguard for kommo-o by being able to throw out Sludge Bombs into Pokemon, and also force Pokemon who are weak to kommo-o to stay in against it. We can see this with Len's team that did well in the previous VR tournament. Of course, this is running Shadow Ball over Sludge Bomb, but still trapping in the kommo-o, being able to switch in on Fairy-type moves, and disabling Fairy-type moves means that it is quite strong. And we do see a Tinkaton there. That is going to be the subject of the next Pokemon that that's going to be a subject of the video going later down the road. But I want to talk about Ninetales. Once again, I'm talking about spread special attackers. We'll get into the physical guys here in a second. But Nevermelt Ice Ninetales is a Pokemon that I think is pretty slept on right now. I do think that Ninetales overall has very underwhelming damage output, but its speed tier combined with its, honestly, while underwhelming, still respectable damage off of Nevermelt Ice Blizzard causes Ninetales to be a bit of an underrated pick in the current format. We have seen it do well on like that Glimmora team that I showcased a few days ago, as it does have that synergy with Glimmora where it is able to play bodyguard and deal with opposing Garchomps. But even the neutral damage that this Ninetales is capable of throwing out is fairly respectable. Ninetales with the Nevermelt Ice and a timid nature. The Blizzard into a Sylveon is not doing too much because it's a Sylveon, a Pokemon with a really ridiculous special defense, but being able to threaten huge damage against Garchomp, just outright one-shotting it, being able to tank a Rock Slide from Mega Aerodactyl, as you do have the Snow Boost, it just naturally eats that with 1/1. That means that your Blizzard is going to be dealing a pretty good amount of damage, 84 to 99%. If it is just a base Aerodactyl, a non-Mega variant, then you'll be able to deal basically a one-shot into it if if you have any way of dealing with a Focus Sash, whether it be Quick Attack or Sucker Punch or something on the next turn, or even just Fake Out. It also has access to Freeze Dry, which is getting more and more useful as you end up seeing Pokemon like Blastoise on that Vivillon team run around, and also even into Basculegion. Scarfed Adaptability Basculegion is one of the strongest Pokemon in the game right now, with Wave Crash dealing a ton of damage and its Last Respects being even stronger if it manages to get a couple of boosts off. One of the advantages of Ninetales is that Ninetales does have that natural bulk from snow, meaning that even with very little investment, you do have a chance to live that Last Respects with two boosts on it, and then your Freeze Dry deals pretty significant damage. It also has access to Icy Wind. Technically, you run Fairy-type moves on it, but for the most part, it's like an Aurora Veil user, and it even has access to Encore. I'm a big fan of Encore, as Blizzard does force a lot of protects into from Pokemon that are weak to it, like Garchomp, like Aerodactyl, if you end up in like a Tailwind position. But being able to Encore those Pokemon into Protect means that your Pokemon that are next to it are able to do whatever they need to do. Really, Alolan Ninetales, it isn't really like a cleanup crew type of Pokemon, nor is it like that huge burst damage that we see on lead with like Garchomp and Charizard and stuff, but it more fills a role of like a niche matchup pick into these very powerful Pokemon, but also as like a counter weather option. I know that Alolan Ninetales is weak to Charizard, but being able to turn off Sun for partner Pokemon means that even like a Sash Ninetales is fairly useful in a lot of situations, as you're able to just reset weather and force the Charizard to have to get back into position. But yeah. This channel is partnered with GamerSupps. If you want to support my work and get great tasting drinks, you can order GamerSupps through my link in the description down below, or with code MoxieBoosted at checkout for 10% off. GamerSupps is a caffeinated product that I recommend only to my 18+ viewers, but my link will send you to their caffeine-free product section just in case. Every product purchased through my link supports my channel financially, so I'd really appreciate the support. Now back to the video. Ninetales is the Pokemon I want to talk about there. Now, a lot of people are going to be calling like nonsense on the Mega Garchomp pick, but Mega Garchomp, I can tell you something. I know that there are people running Mega Garchomp at Indianapolis Regionals this weekend, and I know that at least one of those guys is probably going to top 16. I think that like the roster of people running Mega Garchomp is not a roster that you want to ignore. Those people are pretty good players. So, Mega Garchomp, this exact 6 is really what I'm calling out, because I think this exact 6 is very strong in the metagame right now. Why is Mega Garchomp being used? Well, let me explain. At the start of the format, we saw things like Scarf Garchomp, Dragon Fang Garchomp, Soft Sand Garchomp, even like Focus Sash Garchomp, just max as much damage as you can, kind of like rule the Garchomp meta. That's typically what you would see from Garchomps. But right now, something that we notice is that Garchomps do like to go a little bit bulkier. Let me see if I can find an example. I believe it was VR3's winner. No, not that one. Where was the team that I'm thinking of? This one. Yes. This was the team that did that won the ladder, basically got first place in season 1 of the ladder. Garchomps are running Citrus Berry a lot because it allows for better matchups into opposing Garchomps. If you run enough of bulk, you can live like a Hyper Voice from a Fairy Feather Sylveon, and like it's just able to take on Charizards a lot better. The Solar Beam is not chunking you for nearly as much. But yeah, it runs just enough speed to outspeed what it needs to do, but it mostly runs bulk and like attack, with the Citrus Berry bolstering its defenses a little bit better. And they typically run like Rock Slide, Earthquake, Dragon Claw, and maybe Protect or a coverage move. Because Garchomp are getting bulkier, certain players have realized that it might be time to start considering Mega Garchomp, as you're not really running Garchomp for that super high speed tier, and it's being partnered with something like a Mega Aerodactyl, or a regular Aerodactyl, or like a Whimsicott, or a Talonflame, or any kind of Tailwind setter to make up for that speed. The overall format generally is a very slow format compared to other, or not very slow, it's a relatively slow format compared to stuff like, you know, Gen 9 VGC. However, it's slow enough that we see things like Tailwind Sylveon being viable. I think once you see Tailwind Sylveon being viable, you can kind of recognize that like any Pokemon around that speed tier with good damage output is going to be viable. And Garchomp Mega fits that role, as it's 92 base speed. That's 10 points less than base Garchomp. However, what you get in exchange for that lower speed tier is actually something that you can't really ignore. Let me compare this for you, right? So Garchomp does invest a lot in its bulk and not much in its speed right now, meaning that you can actually, and it uses a Citrus Berry to further bolster the bulk. So 108 HP, 95 defense, as opposed to 108 HP, 115 defense, and then the increased special defense, 85 goes up to 95, and then the increased attack, 130 all the way to 170. This makes it so Mega Garchomp is able to deal much better damage than base Garchomp, as base Garchomp isn't running damage boosting items right now. Mega Garchomp will just always have the superior damage output, but it's also able to take advantage of Tailwind basically just as well as base Garchomp and have superior bulk across the board. Mega Garchomp is able to significantly stifle like the game plan of certain teams. A lot of Charizard right now are running a set that is able to tank a hit from base Garchomp Rock Slide. Let me show you something, right? Bulky Charizard Y, 2414 into a Garchomp. Let's go with a Scarf offensive Garchomp, Adamant Nature. That Rock Slide is doing 85 to 101%. That is a roll in their favor to live. That is a very common spread for Charizard right now to ensure that it is able to play into Garchomp. But when you Mega Evolve it, you go, I'm just going to KO you. That's kind of nuts. The increased damage from Earthquake is also significant into Pokemon like Sylveon, which you're going to outspeed due to the fact that Sylveon's just like super slow, meaning that your Earthquake is a guarantee to a KO. It's very easy to chunk things in range of Garchomp Earthquake, and that's like not insignificant. And even then, if you decide to run this Garchomp, the Dragon move is up for grabs. You can either run Dragon Claw, or you could even take advantage of Scale Shot, a move that Garchomp it sacrifices reliability for the fact that it gets a speed boost, allowing you to bypass that issue with your speed, even beyond the fact that you might have like a Tailwind setter. Basically, Mega Garchomp is taking advantage of like the current Garchomp trends that are happening, where they want to be bulkier and they want to hit harder, but they don't necessarily rely on that speed stat nearly as much, and they usually run an item that just bolsters their defense rather than having like more damage output. This allows for Garchomp to do all of that while still having greater damage output than like the norm. So yeah, Mega Garchomp is in a relatively good spot. It doesn't matter that it loses Rough Skin, because Sand Force doesn't really matter in most situations, and hey, if you do face a Sand team, man, they're gonna have a rough time against Sand Force. That's gonna be cool. But yeah. Next up, Tinkaton. Tinkaton is a Pokemon that I think is relatively underrated right now, but it really only has a home on Perish Trap teams, and there's very good reason for this. Tinkaton is a Pokemon that has access to the very coveted move of Gigaton Hammer, and while Gigaton Hammer isn't the greatest move of all time on a Pokemon like Tinkaton with only 75 attack, that initial damage is enough where Tinkaton is able to one-shot every relevant fairy type in the game. If I could spell Tinkaton. Let's see, so Tinkaton, let's go with a Floette. Let's go with the bulkiest Floette. Let's go with Calm Mind. 26 HP. Let's go 32. Let's go 32. Let's even give it 2 defense, right? 32, 2. And we give this thing Gigaton Hammer with no investment whatsoever. 87 to 103. Guess what? You can just invest in that attack stat a little bit. You can run like a, you probably want to go like a Jolly Nature, but you don't have to invest much in that attack stat. You can see 13 is enough to guarantee the one shot in the max HP Mega Floette Eternal. And Tinkaton also has access to a bunch of other tools. One of the biggest things with Tinkaton is Steel Fairy is one of the best types in the game. You are able to switch in on Dragon type moves as you're completely immune. You're also immune to Poison type moves, and you resist Fairy type moves. Like, it's just a really good defensive profile on a Pokemon with pretty mediocre bulk overall. So it's just able to take that mediocre bulk and kind of make it like, kind of stretch it a little bit further. But typically they run like Fake Out and Encore, and I believe the Fake Out, Encore, Protect, Gigaton Hammer with a Shuka Berry. Effectively what this does is it's able to lead off next to a Gengar, kind of like force Pokemon to stay in, and it allows for Tinkaton to go for the Disable Encore strat next to a Gengar, basically forcing a Pokemon to not only be able to not switch, but also be forced to struggle as it is locked into a move that it can no longer use. Tinkaton is also one of the faster Fake Out users in the game, which is able to deal pretty significant burst damage with Gigaton Hammer, making it pretty effective on Perish Trap, as while Perish Trap does like to force in weaker Pokemon or Pokemon that can't take on Gengar, and then like slowly KO them with the Perish turns, like after 3 turns. One of the better ways to run Perish Trap is just to get as much damage as you can initially, and when you're down to 2 Pokemon, if you have like a 1 Pokemon advantage with the Perish archetype that you're running, then that typically is enough where you can just like click Protect, Disable, and do all these annoying moves to position yourself where you just win via Perish. So yeah, Tinkaton also pairs super well with Kommo-o because Kommo-o needs a bodyguard from Fairy types in the metagame. Like, obviously Tinkaton is a Pokemon that is more than capable of one-shotting a Sylveon, one of the better Pokemon in the game right now. Fairy Feather Sylveon, max HP, let's give it 2 defense investment just for like worst case scenario. Gigaton Hammer with practically no investment, still KOing. You only need 3 attack investment. No, 2 attack investment to KO that thing. So yeah, and its speed tier is pretty decent. A lot of Garchomp, like we said, aren't going super fast right now, meaning that it is fairly easy for a Tinkaton to outpace them and be able to Encore lock them into a Protect, which of course is going to be very good for partner Gengar as they're not able to swing at them. So yeah, Tinkaton actually in a pretty good position right now, at least on Perish Trap teams. I don't think that there's many other archetypes that it really wants to find itself on. Next up, Rhyperior. These are my 2 hot takes. I think that these are Pokemon that are well positioned in the metagame right now. So Rhyperior, really it just comes down to Solid Rock being an incredible ability, and the fact that Rhyperior has one of the better attack stats in the game, and arguably is like one of the best Trick Room Pokemon right now. We did see some Rhyperior kind of go crazy in the Scraw tournament that happened a few weeks ago on Farigiraf Charizard teams. I think that Rhyperior's access to Solid Rock as well as a partner Charizard allows for it to even play outside of Trick Room. As we see here, Rhyperior, blank set. Let's just go ahead and go like worst case scenario. Let's say you're facing a Adaptability Basket Legion. That Wave Crash hurts, right? That Wave Crash hurts. However, you know, you bring out the Sun, you cut that damage in half, and suddenly that's all it really takes to eat the most powerful water type move in the game, because Solid Rock allows for you to cut that damage quite a bit. And its damage output is nothing to scoff at. 140 attack with access to Earthquake, High Horsepower, Rock Slide, and even like these great coverage moves. I believe it gets Ice Punch. Yeah, it has like these awesome coverage moves which allow it to hit Pokemon like Garchomp. It even has access to like fighting moves if you need to hit a King Gambit, but for the most part Earthquake is there. And that 140 attack stat is nothing to scoff at. I mean, 140 is higher than even Garchomp, one of the best physical attackers in the game right now. So as you can see, that High Horsepower is doing 67 to 79%. And if you want to go crazy, let's say you want to run Rock Wrecker, you know, it's signature move, that could go kind of nuts. Well, now you're just one-shotting a Basket Legion. I don't think you typically want to do that. I think for the most part, what Rhyperior wants to find itself on is like an archetype where it is being able to play comfortably into what is popular. So typically that's going to be like your Charizard Y archetypes, but maybe like a variant of Charizard Y where it does have that Farigiraf on there, and it does have a Rhyperior, just a like solid Trick Room option in case you find yourself having to play into that. And it's also just a good way to mix things up. Typically Pokemon that Charizard struggles with are Pokemon like Garchomp and Aerodactyl, which basically exist to ruin Charizard's day. If you do decide to mix things up with your Charizard team and go for the Farigiraf Rhyperior and the last 2 slots, that does allow for you to have better counterplay into these Pokemon, as Rhyperior is obviously able to deal with Mega Aerodactyl pretty effectively. You can see offensive Mega Aerodactyl does not enjoy taking a Rock Slide from Rhyperior. Rock Slide from Rhyperior is doing 81 to 96% minimum, or 81% minimum to 96%, and if it is like a base Aerodactyl, it's not enjoying that at all. Meanwhile, Aerodactyl struggles to hit it basically at all. That Rock Slide is bouncing off of Rhyperior, doing 9 to 10%. That is kind of nuts from a Mega Aerodactyl. Is that right? That's kind of insane. 115 HP. What? Yeah, no, it resists that move. And even Garchomp, a Pokemon that does have a super effective attack into it with Earthquake, that's a 3-hit KO. That is a 3-hit KO, and man, you got Ice Punch on this thing. This thing barks, man. Ice Punch 112. Like, it is kind of a nuts Pokemon right now. I think that Rhyperior isn't like the greatest Pokemon in the metagame, but I do think it is relatively underexplored, and I think as of right now, it is something that you could kind of look into as like a counter meta option. And the last Pokemon I want to talk about is Bellibolt. So let me sell you on Bellibolt really quick. So I built this Bellibolt team in like 5 minutes, and it took me to, where am I on ladder right now on this account? Where am I on ladder right now? I am at 1722, and that's after testing a little bit. So that is just outside of top 500, with me previously hitting 1800, which is like top 300, I think. So I managed to break top 300 on Showdown with Bellibolt. And why is that? It's because Bellibolt is actually kind of nuts damage-wise. Let me show you something. Bellibolt exists in a format where there are not very many good electric types. There's like 2, and they're named Rotom, and I can't even think of a second one. It's basically just Rotom, right? Bellibolt is an alternative, and while it does play a little bit strange, it is a Pokemon that you have to respect. Bellibolt has incredible HP at 109 and pretty decent defense at 91, meaning that it can eat hits from Garchomp. You can see an Adamant Earthquake from Garchomp is not doing very much damage to my Bellibolt. As a matter of fact, all it's going to do is activate Electromorphosis and allow for Bellibolt to hit a partner Pokemon. But what really impressed me about Bellibolt is the Magnet set. If you run 26 special attack investment with a Magnet, and you do opt to go for the Electromorphosis ability, and you're facing off against an offensive Sneasler, right? Obviously, most Sneaslers are offensive, basically all of them. And that Sneasler decides to go for a close combat into your Bellibolt or a Dire Claw. Let's go close combat for like worst case situation, right? That's going to activate Electromorphosis. Let me read what Electromorphosis does for you guys. Electromorphosis gives Bellibolt the charge effect when it's hit by an attack. What is charge? The user's next electric move is doubled in power. That is nuts. Double power electric move with stab and a magnet is a crazy stack. So let's activate Electromorphosis, doubling the power of our moves. That means that our Electroweb, if they Dire Claws, is dealing 57 to 68% to this Sneasler. That is not only speed control, but speed control on a Pokemon that they don't want to hit because it will be hitting back very hard. And if they do decide to go for that close combat, lowering their special defense stat, well, guess what? Now it is a roll to one-shot a Sneasler with a weak Electroweb. Electroweb is a 55 base power move, and this is one of my favorite interactions. King Gambit. If King Gambit swings into a Bellibolt, Bellibolt wants to be slow for this reason. It wants to get hit and then retaliate. Kowtow Cleave into Bellibolt is doing... I'm double checking my levels are right, because it doesn't feel right. Because this Pokemon's just nuts. Yeah, we're in Champions. They're all level 50. Kowtow Cleave is doing 43 to 51% to this max defense Bellibolt. You know, good amount of damage. However, that Thunderbolt it's hitting it back with is a roll to one-shot. Matter of fact, if you want to make it even better, you can just go max special attack investment, decrease your HP a little, or decrease your defense a little bit, and play very similarly. I am going to stick with that 26 HP though, because I just want to, you know, go with the set that I'm familiar with. Bellibolt also is kind of good into Aerodactyl. If I remember correctly, this set was literally just calced to always live Earthquake and Rock Slide from Aerodactyl Garchomp, allowing for you to go for the Electroweb into the Aerodactyl, which, spoilers, is a one-shot if they give you Electromorphosis. You just one-shot that thing. And even Charizard Y. does not have a great time against Bellibolt, as it's not able to one-shot it with Heat Wave. It does have to go for Weather Ball, which you can also just, calc to try to live that. And your Electroweb with Electromorphosis is going to be doing 86%, or your Discharge of one-shot, or your Thunderbolt is also a one-shot. Basically, Bellibolt is kind of a landmine Pokemon. It kind of plays like that. And if you put it next to the right tools, like a Floette, a Pokemon that puts off a lot of like offensive pressure, it's able to do a lot. Like your Floette has speed control next to it, and speed control that really hurts. It kind of plays like, it's a weird comparison, but like the Terra Electric Magnet, Raging Bolts that we used to see in like Regulation F. But yeah, let's say that you're playing against a Floette Eternal, right? And they decide to go for a Moonblast into you because you're not surviving Light of Ruin, or they go for a Dazzling Gleam or something. Your Electromorphosis Electroweb is dealing 35 to 42% to this Pokemon with a 150 or 148 special defense stat. And your Thunderbolt is doing 78 to 93, or you can even go for Discharge or something. Basically, Bellibolt is just kind of free to swing and chunk the entire opposing team for huge damage, while partner Pokemon are able to do what they need to, and then you just do the cleanup crew situation, like that whole routine that you do with your King Gambit and Basculegion. Yeah, Bellibolt is an interesting Pokemon right now, and I'm going to be using it on the channel tomorrow, or not tomorrow, I'm going to be using it on the channel on Saturday, so that should be a fun video. But yeah, I just want to talk about these 5 Pokemon going into Indianapolis Regionals, just talk about like them being sleeper picks. Just a quick video for tonight because I am a little bit behind and I'm trying to catch up. But if you guys enjoyed, leave a like, subscribe, turn notifications, and I will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.